Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Dave, and today I'm going to run through my Venom process. I have everything broken down into layers right now, but I'm going to kind of just go through and explain everything that I did with each layer. So I have it open in Clip Studio and Photoshop so that I can break it down for you. So this is the final image, if you've seen it posted up. It's for the Venom number 25 cover for Marvel. I wanted to go with a different approach for this. So, thought process going into it is that everybody's depicted Venom as sort of this, nasty, creepy, scary monster character. And we all kind of know that side of Venom. But I've always been more attracted to kind of how Venom is depicted in games like the Marvel vs. Capcom series, and I really like that he's more colorful there, and he has kind of at least to me, the opposite look to how you'd expect something like this, which is bright, vibrant colors. So I went with that for the cover because I don't really see a lot of very colorful Venoms. I feel like people go for the dark approach more often than not. So with this one, I wanted to lean into the contrast of who Venom is as a character. The idea that Venom is scary and dangerous and all of these things. So take that and do the flip of it and do bright, almost like happy, vibrant colors for something scary to hopefully make a kind of different interpretation of Venom. That's the idea going into it. So with that in mind, I'm going to show you how I broke this whole thing down. Okay, so the first thing is I started with a sketch. This is just black and white. It's not straight up black. I don't go for the darkest values possible. I usually go with something that's pretty dark but not all the way black. Like if you look, if I eyedrop this right now, you can see where it's at. Actually, is that one actually black? Hold on. Let me make sure I didn't adjust this. Well, if I did go all the way black, I definitely adjusted it later to not be that dark. Yeah, see, it's not completely black, but maybe it did lean that way when I edited it. Usually, let me adjust this just to show you. My sketches kind of fall. Oh, I actually remember what I did. So usually my sketches fall somewhere like, I would say in this range, and then just to make it so that I can add darker values in places and control the focus of your eye better. So if I go too dark in too many spots, then there's never that like hard black that's going to draw your eye in sitting next to the white. And keeping it in the mid-tone range makes it a bit easier to kind of play with your value scale that way. So what I did, why it's so dark, is I duplicated this sketch layer when I went in to do the painting so that I'd have darker values. I generally, because I'm in the painting when I'm doing it, I don't see that I've gone too light on a lot of things, which is better than going too dark at first, because then there's more room to play with it. But yeah, so I'll generally like bump up the contrast or whatever. But all I do when I do this is using the brush that you've likely downloaded from the Patreon here. I just use that. I set it to opacity like maybe 34 or up to 50. It doesn't really matter. And then I just start sketching. So if I bump it up, let's bump it up to 50. So I just basically do this. I have white as my other color here, and I'll press X on the keyboard to switch between black and white, if you can see that switching. So I'll use white and paint out, black and paint in, white and paint out. And then after I do that, I'm on to the next step of, I finish this quick sketch to get my idea across. The next thing I do is color fills. This is pretty straightforward. I take this layer, set it to multiply, and I'll do this in Photoshop, which is what I'll just pull up right now. So if I go back to this, pretty much I just set this to multiply, and then using, well, I can't remember his name, because I brutalize that name every time I think of it, like Gregor Rich something. I mean, if you go to my brush thing, I put a link to his Gumroads where you can download his brushes. But what I do, and what I did for this, I just use some of his cool, like, textured, painterly looking brushes like this. So you can see it kind of has, if I zoom in on it, you can get a good idea. It has like cool brushstroke look. So it's like a base canvas coat of paint kind of thing. And I'll do that underneath just to put a base color down, and then with a regular brush, doesn't need to be textured or anything, I'll go in and fill in the other colors for Venom like this. So I'll just do a blue because that's the complementary color of orange. I'm going for a very simple, straightforward, high impact image. I'm just going for contrast in every respect. So I did this, and then I bring it back into Clip Studio and just did some kind of green scribbly lines for the Venom that Venom has. And then this is what I'll submit. I submitted this to Marvel for sketch approval, and they liked the idea, just the simple composition. They liked that it's just like a portrait of Venom, and then from that approval I move on to the next step. So the next step after this is the final line phase. And you can see that my lines, they're not like crazy detailed. They're pretty detailed, but they're not super clean. I'm not really trying to do perfect pencil lines. When I know it's going to be a painting, I don't necessarily care about that. I mean, and if you look at this, like, look how messy the texture is. And you know, this is using the clip brush that I only use one clip brush for the whole thing, and that's this one. Everything that I use in Photoshop is basically just texture brushes that I put on soft light layers, which basically makes them look like a wash on top of your final, or the colors that you've laid down. But it doesn't really, I don't really use it to do solid brush strokes that impact what I've done here. I just basically use them to add a little bit of texture laid over top of my painting that I've already started. So this is pretty crude, in my opinion. I don't know. You might think this is not so much that, but I don't care too much about how this looks. I just need it to read. Basically, I need you to be able to see it right away for what it is. You know, you can see where the shadows are going to be. You can see where the light's going to be. That's all I care about. People do this when they do paintings. They just do an underpainting, and the underpainting doesn't need to be perfect. And that's how I'm treating this. I'm not trying to do a perfect academic drawing. I'm just trying to get my underpainting right. And this was done, again, this actually probably looks more like this, or probably closer to this. And I just duplicate the layer and adjust it so that the values get darker. But when I'm actually working on it, I probably had this as the value scale. So I would use a color. I just eyedrop using a Alt on the keyboard. So selected the color here, and then, you know, white here. But basically all I do is, for my final lines, go in at whatever 50% opacity, doesn't really matter, and I just kind of work in my lines real quick for whatever I'm doing, you know, doing squiggles here, and then I'll go in, I'll turn the brush down to like 30% and do the shadows, just quickly washing everything in. Again, doesn't really need to be perfect. The shapes just need to read, and where the shadows are going to be need to read. I don't care so much about anything else. I don't want to render every single value between. I don't want it to look like a grayscale painting, because if I do that, then basically when I move into the color phase, if I were to render the whole thing in black and white, I would essentially be adjusting these for the colors I want. But I don't want to do that. I want to be painting with the colors that are there and doing all the value work that way. if that makes any sense to you. Basically, if I were to paint this whole thing in grayscale and make all of this look realistic like the final here, then I wouldn't have the same vibrant colors because I would be basically having to repaint the whole painting with the blues. Like I would need to select this strong blue because it would take me a lot to bring the grayscale into being this vibrant, whereas I could just drop in colors like I'll show you and get there much more simply. So this is the line art colored. Same thing that I showed you before in Photoshop. I just laid it in with the texture brushes and just started kind of making sure that my colors made sense. They were close to my original sketch. So the original sketch, you know, right here, I went with even more red in here because I thought that was a bit more striking. I felt like the orange was too tame in the previous one, but I'll show you how that evolved. So this is my base, nothing crazy about that. And then here's where I start to add some values, and I'll show you how I do that. So let's go back to Photoshop. So basically what I did is, I'll take the blue here, which is sitting beneath the lines. The lines are on a multiply layer. And then what I'll do is do the fill, and then I use that fill layer that I'll have. So let's say I have this and I fill the whole thing blue. I'll do layer, new layer, and then use previous as a clipping mask. And then on top of here, I'll start to add in other effects. So I'll, like I can take this and just go in and it only affects this. I can also turn this into a soft light layer, or I can turn it into a multiply. Then that's how I'll start to work in my values. And that's what this is. Over top, the light blue here, that's me basically just selecting the blue and then using it as a soft light or an overlay and bumping up the colors and making sure the shadows are there. All I'm really trying to do is get the lighting to kind of look more like this sketch. So I want everything here to fall into shadow, everything in here to fall into shadow. So that's it. I'm just also using a couple texture-y brushes. Use whatever you want, whatever you think fits the piece. This one I used kind of like a canvasy looking one and just got loose with it. I don't really care too much. I just want there to be an underlying texture to the whole painting. So putting that there helps to have something. Like I'll paint over the whole thing so you'll kind of lose a lot of that texture, but it'll show through here and there and you'll know it's there. It'll feel a little less digital. So the next step is just this. So I've moved over into a clip for this. This is Photoshop where I do the texturing and color adjusting. I flatten the whole thing. So flatten all the layers, and then I'll save it as a new version of the file. Open that version up in Clip Studio, and then without doing anything like special here, I'm not going to add in any new values or anything. I'm just going to use the eyedropper tool and just start rendering. So the way that I did Venom, so you see how it looks here. What I did is I would just select this, colors that were already there. Let's set my brush to like 50 something opacity, and then I just start painting. I'm not going to lose these hard shadow lines. That's the whole point of them being there. They're guides for me. I don't want to make them too muddy. I still want them to be defining forms the way they are. So I try not to paint them out too much. I don't want to paint too much outside the lines. So I'll go and select, different values from the painting for light and dark. I basically keep my finger on the Alt key the whole time. Just select and paint, until I start to have something that's reading a bit better, so the values make sense. But yeah, I do this until I'm at a stage like this. It's just rendering. And then the lighting here is just from experience. I know how light works, so I am going from imagination on what I remember. This tooth sits in front of this tooth, so it's going to drop a cast shadow. I know the light's coming from like up over here. I have an idea that there's a light source coming down, and like, let me turn this brush opacity up so I can do this. So I know that there's like a light source coming from this direction. So I have an idea of where the light's hitting and then where all the shadows will go. It's just more of the same, just rendering. Again, more rendering and refining. So you can see all in here. I try to go big to small. So I'll work up a mass first. It's like if you see in here, I'll work up all the shapes in this big mass and then work to small veins and things. Like all these little tiny details are the last parts of what I'm doing. Same in the eye here. Like you render a lot of this first and then start doing detail things. Because to make something like Venom look realistic, it's pretty simple, because with regular people and things, you can't get away with as much, but I can create as many little divots in here as I want. And that really helps to sell realism, because you're creating more shadows and highlights that define forms even better and better and better, so that you make something that pops, and you can control how much it pops, because this is a character that isn't real. So you get to kind of go nuts with it. So if you can see, like every time I add a highlight to these edges that lay on these shadows, it makes these things that are facing the light pop a bit more. Do you see how that works? And you get to do that a lot with a character like Venom, because he has little, wrinkles all over his body. It's real easy to make this stuff look a bit more realistic if you know how to make light read on forms. And you see, like just that alone makes that eye pop a lot more and makes it look a bit more realistic. Just that high contrast. Just a real simple way of making something pop. You just can't do that as simply on a character that's supposed to be human or something, because they don't have big huge holes in their face everywhere to make it read as three-dimensional like that. Okay, so again, yeah, the refining, again, big to small too. Had this whole tongue here. I just did basic rendering here, and then I will slowly work in detail on top, and I get pretty detailed. And I know some of you are asking about the size of my image. If you look up here at the top of the screen, it's 5992 by 9087 pixels at 500 dpi. So I work pretty large. I do that because I like to use my images in multiple ways. So if I can have this thing be like a print or whatever, then I'll do that. I have to give you guys a slightly smaller file size just because it's Marvel and I don't own it, and you all can't just, print it. But yeah, that's how big I work. If it were my own personal piece, I would just give you the full file size. But yeah, so getting details like that comes from the fact that the image is huge. If I didn't have the image be huge, then this stuff would look super pixely. So again, the further refining, even further refining, doing all those little background pieces. I save little tiny things like the teeth and the emblem on his chest for the end, because these things sit on top of the fully rendered painted form, and I feel like it's much easier to add them in later rather than having to paint around something like the symbol on his chest, because there's so many fine details in that and it's so precise that if you had to render this while keeping this intact, it would be such a pain in the ass. It's easier to just do big brush strokes and paint through the whole form of the chest and everything and not have to worry about little tiny details getting lost. So just to speed everything up, I do all of that at the end. So you paint what's behind the teeth first and then paint the teeth after. And stuff like this, the venom that's going to be coming from his mouth, that's so far at the end. In fact, pretty much there right now. So yeah, this is all done. I mean, I can add venom to this so that you can see what I'm doing. This is all added at the end. You know, it just sits on top of everything. So I'll show you. I'll do, let's say like 30% opacity. I can't remember exactly what I used for this. And I can just go in and brush in some venom. I want to keep it kind of transparent so that it has that look like you can see through it, where it's thinning out and then where it thickens in the full line of spit. Then it has that truer green. So if I were to do like a thin part here, I wouldn't go too much. The edges would have more because that's where the lines are. And then if I feel like that's too much of a green, I can select the color behind it and just wash that in again to make it look like you're kind of seeing through it. If I want a hole in it, I can go all the way. And yeah, when I want there to be a bit more impact with the green here, I'll go in and just do specular highlights and then little tiny details like that. So I select let's just do like the white of the eye or something, and go in and, you know, just paint that highlight in. Just gives it a bit more realism. And these are all tiny details at the end, and honestly they're like the fastest things to paint, but they look cool and, you know, adds a lot of impact to the final image. So again, I would say every step after this has all been in Clip Studio. I haven't left the program yet. So this final here is done in Photoshop. So I'll hop over to Photoshop and show you what that looked like. Okay, so here's the Photoshop final, which is just adjustments. So I'll show you how I get there. So this is what it ended up being. This is what it was in Clip. My colors always go like this. You know, you don't go fully commit to complete contrast, complete vibrancy in the color and everything when you're at this, you know, painted stage, because as you paint, you know, you kind of lose certain colors here and there, and you're just rendering and rendering and rendering, and you're not doing like adjustments along the way. So this kind of always happens to me. It gets a little diluted. So what I do is I just make a selective color adjustment layer. So it sits up here. It's right down here, this little like half circle thing. You just choose selective color from there, and then you can go through and select whatever color you want that's in the image and adjust the whole thing. So I want to adjust all the blues in this piece. So I select blues and I just go and I want to make it more blue. So you'll get a you'll get the hang of this as you go. And then I'll go to cyan, adjust that, and you can see how I can go full blue, I can go full green, whatever you want. And then magenta, I can make them more purple, I can make them even more green. So you can get all over the place with that. And then, yeah, just adjust it to the point where you like, and then you go to yellow. Yellow's for all the teeth and everything. So I can bump all that up. So you see, like, I'm making the teeth a bit more orange. And then the reds finally. The red's going to adjust the tongue and the background. So you see how that goes. And it's just to get everything bumped up to a place where I feel looks a bit more finished and cohesive. And then this is what it ended up being here, which I like. My other adjustment was just, what I did for you all, just on the fly to kind of show you what it would look like. So, yeah, this is just basically me doing final adjustments, contrast. I'll do levels on this. So I'll do like an adjustment layer for levels. I'll do a brightness and contrast. I'll do a color balance, just whatever I can to make it look better, more in line with what I had in my head. And once I feel that I'm done, I'll go in and just do filter, sharpen, smart sharpen. And then you play with this and get it to a place you like. You can go crazy with it. You can sharpen to the point where it looks horrible. You just want to find a good balance. Whatever makes it read. So yeah. And then once I'm satisfied with that, I'll basically just flatten the whole thing, save it as a TIFF file, and then send it off to the client. And that's it. That's the whole process for this Venom. That's how I did the whole thing. And yeah, hopefully this helped. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'll check them out. So thanks for supporting me. Patreon, I really appreciate it. I'll have the PSD attached to this so that you can go through it and check out all the layers for yourself. But yeah, I hope that this helped in some way. And have a good night and good luck with Corona and all that. And I'll talk to you all later. All right.